Simon Ekpa's bail hearing took place on July 2nd, 2025 at the Pihajoki District Court in Finland, where the judge emphasized that the matter was about temporary release, not guilt or innocence. The prosecuting lawyer strongly opposed bail, arguing Simon Ekpa's broadcasts from Finland incited violence and civil unrest in southeastern Nigeria, citing risks of reoffending, witness tampering, and undermining justice. The defense lawyer countered by stating the prosecution's claims were based on unproven assumptions, and that Simon Ekpa had not been convicted in Finland, had cooperated fully with authorities, and posed no flight risk. A heated courtroom debate ensued between both legal teams, with the prosecution accusing Simon Ekpa of abusing free speech, while the defense maintained that Simon Ekpa's speech was political, not criminal, and protected under Finnish law. Simon Ekpa personally addressed the court, expressing regret if his words were misinterpreted, denying any call for violence, and emphasizing his commitment to peace, Finnish law, and his willingness to comply with bail terms. The prosecutor responded by labeling Simon Ekpa's speech as strategic incitement, disguised as activism, and insisted that he posed a real danger if released due to his ongoing online influence. The defense requested to bring in a character witness, which the prosecution opposed, calling it irrelevant, but the judge allowed the witness, stating fairness required a full picture of Simon Ekpa's character and ties to Finland. The witness, a long-time Finnish resident, testified that Simon Ekpa was peaceful, law-abiding, had strong ties to Finland, and would definitely obey bail conditions if granted. After a court recess, the judge ruled in favor of granting Simon Ekpa tentative bail, pending the announcement of specific bail conditions in the next hearing. The courtroom saw quiet celebrations as Simon Ekpa and his legal team welcomed the decision, and it was revealed that members of the United States President's cabinet had sent messages to Finland urging them to respect Simon Ekpa's human rights and release him. On the morning of July 2nd, 2025, the weather in Pihajoki, a quiet and peaceful town in Finland, felt unusually intense. It was not because of a storm or a dramatic shift in temperature, but because something politically and emotionally charged was about to happen inside the walls of the Pihajoki District Court. People gathered early around the court premises. Some were journalists holding recording equipment and notepads, while others were concerned citizens, supporters, or even critics of a man who had become one of the most controversial figures in the growing political and activist landscape between Africa and Europe. His name was Simon Njoku Ekpa. Simon Njoku Ekpa, originally from Nigeria, has been living in Finland for several years. He is known by many as a political activist, a strong voice in the struggle for Biafran independence, and a media broadcaster whose online presence had drawn both admiration and intense criticism. Over the past year, Simon Njoku Ekpa had been under investigation by Finnish authorities due to claims that his broadcasts from Finland had allegedly incited violence in southeastern Nigeria, a region already troubled by years of tension, secessionist movements, and military crackdowns. His arrest in Finland was not just a local legal matter, it became a global issue, drawing attention from human rights activists, politicians, diplomats, and members of the international press. This case now reached a turning point. The court was set to decide whether Simon Njoku Ekpa would be granted temporary bail or remain in custody while the broader trial continued. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was heavy with tension. Every seat was filled, and the eyes of the world, especially of those who had followed the Biafran movement and the political dynamics in Nigeria, were metaphorically present. Everyone wanted to know what the Finnish judge would decide. Would he release Simon Nyoku Ekpa on bail, or would he side with the prosecution and keep him behind bars? At the center of the room sat Simon Nyoku Ekpa, dressed in a neat, dark blue suit with a white shirt. His expression was calm, but his eyes betrayed the weight of what he was going through. His legal team, including a respected Finnish defense lawyer, stood by his side. On the other end of the courtroom sat the prosecutor, a well-known figure in Finland's legal community, stern and uncompromising in his role. The judge opened the hearing by reminding everyone that this session was about a very specific legal point. He made it clear that this was not a trial to determine guilt or innocence. Instead, it was about whether Simon Nyoku Ekpa could be granted temporary release under legal supervision, pending the outcome of the full legal process. He emphasized that Finnish law allowed for fair and reasonable conditions under which bail could be granted, and that the court's responsibility was to weigh the risks and arguments presented by both sides. The prosecutor was the first to speak. He stood with a folder of documents and a calm but firm voice. He told the court that granting bail to Simon Nyoku Ekpa would be a mistake that could have serious consequences. He explained that Simon Nyoku Ekpa's online broadcasts, though made from the safety of Finland, had caused ripple effects thousands of miles away in southeastern Nigeria. According to the prosecutor, those broadcasts had contributed to civil unrest, fear, and even violence. He claimed that releasing Simon Nyoku Ekpa would not only give him the opportunity to continue spreading messages that could inflame tensions, but might also lead to witness tampering or manipulation of the legal process. The prosecutor read out statements, excerpts from speeches, and examples of how, according to him, the influence of Simon Nyoku Ekpa was not just words, it was strategic and carefully designed to create instability in Nigeria. He pointed out that Simon Nyoku Ekpa had a vast online audience and loyal supporters, and that his voice, if left unchecked, could become a tool of further disorder. He accused him of abusing the principle of free speech and turning it into a weapon of incitement. He concluded by urging the judge not to fall into what he called the trap of political sympathy, but to recognize the legal and ethical responsibilities the court had in preventing further harm. When the prosecutor finished, the courtroom was silent for a few seconds. Then, Simon Nyoku Ekpa's defense lawyer rose to speak. Her voice was calm, deliberate, and persuasive. She began by acknowledging the seriousness of the claims, but firmly rejected the idea that Simon Nyoku Ekpa was a threat to public safety. She pointed out that her client had not been convicted of any crime in Finland or anywhere else. In fact, he had fully cooperated with Finnish authorities since his arrest. He had not attempted to flee, had not hidden evidence, and had shown nothing but respect for the legal system. She argued that what was being presented as incitement was actually political speech, a form of activism protected under Finnish law. She reminded the court that Finland has one of the strongest traditions of free expression in the world, and that this right extends even to unpopular opinions or controversial political statements. The defense lawyer said that Simon Nyoku Ekpa's words had been misinterpreted and misused by those who wished to silence him. She also rejected the idea that Simon Nyoku Ekpa was a flight risk. He had a home in Finland, family, and strong community ties. She reminded the judge that her client had always appeared in court when summoned, never tried to evade responsibility, and was even willing to accept strict bail conditions, including surveillance, limited online access, or any other measure the court deemed appropriate. She insisted that the prosecution was using fear and speculation instead of evidence and law. At this point, the judge asked Simon Nyoku Ekpa if he wanted to speak for himself. He stood up slowly, adjusted the microphone, and spoke with a quiet but emotional voice. He said that he regretted if any of his statements were misunderstood. He explained that his intention had never been to encourage violence, but to speak out for the voiceless, for those who felt oppressed or unheard. He said he was committed to peace, respected Finnish law, and had no intention of violating the conditions of his bail. He told the court that all he wanted was a chance to continue his activism in a legal and peaceful way. When Simon Yoku Ekpa finished speaking, the prosecutor stood again and replied that the activist's words were not as innocent as they appeared. He insisted that Simon Yoku Ekpa was a master of rhetoric, using political language to disguise strategic incitement. According to the prosecutor, Simon Yoku Ekpa's speeches were crafted to appear peaceful while actually encouraging division, rebellion, and mistrust. He asked the court not to be deceived by clever words. Then came a moment of surprise. The defense lawyer asked the court for permission to bring in a character witness. The prosecutor objected, calling it unnecessary and irrelevant. But the judge paused, thought carefully, and said that fairness required a complete picture. The witness was allowed. A woman in her mid-40s entered the courtroom. She had known Simon Yoku Ekpa for years in Finland and described him as respectful, hard-working, peaceful, and devoted to his community. She said he was a loving father, a committed resident of Finland, and someone who followed the rules. She assured the judge that Simon Yoku Ekpa would never run away from the law and would comply fully with bail conditions. After her testimony, the court went into a short recess. People murmured quietly, reflecting on the arguments and the emotional testimonies. Some looked hopeful, while others appeared skeptical. When the judge returned to the bench, everyone sat in silence. The judge then read his decision. He acknowledged the seriousness of the charges and the concerns raised by the prosecution. But he also emphasized the fundamental rights guaranteed under Finnish law, including the right to be presumed innocent and the right to bail under reasonable conditions. He said that after reviewing the evidence, hearing both sides, and considering the character witness, he believed that Simon Yoku Ekpa could be released on temporary bail under strict supervision. The details of the bail conditions, he said, would be announced in a follow-up session. As soon as the judge delivered his ruling, the courtroom filled with quiet sighs of relief, subtle smiles, and a few tears. Simon Yoku Ekpa turned to his legal team and nodded with gratitude. His family members in the courtroom clasped hands, clearly moved by the outcome. Supporters outside the courtroom began calling friends and posting online, announcing the victory. It was also revealed shortly afterward that members of the cabinet of the President of the United States of America had sent messages to Finnish authorities before the hearing. These communications urged Finland to ensure that Simon Yoku Ekpa's human rights were respected and to consider releasing him under bail. This unexpected revelation added a layer of international political interest to an already tense and complex case. By evening, the news of Simon Yoku Ekpa's bail approval had spread across social media, news platforms, and political forums. Some celebrated the decision as a win for justice, human rights, and free speech. Others criticized it as a risk to public peace and an example of international pressure influencing domestic legal systems. In southeastern Nigeria, reactions were also mixed. Some community members felt hopeful that peace talks or dialogue could now move forward. Others worried that tensions might rise again. Back in Pihajoki, as the court session ended and people left the building, a small group of supporters gathered outside, quietly holding placards with words like "Justice for all," "Free speech is not a crime," and "Peace through truth." A soft breeze blew across the square. One woman, holding her daughter by the hand, whispered, "Maybe this is the beginning of something new." Whether that something new will be peace, continued struggle, or more legal battles remains to be seen. But one thing is certain. The courtroom decision on July 2, 2025, granting bail to Simon Nyoku Ekpa, has deeply shaken not just a courtroom in Finland, but the wider conversation about justice, activism, and the boundaries between political speech and national security in the modern world. As the news of Simon Nyoku Ekpa's bail approval began to ripple across Finland and Nigeria, it became obvious that this was not just a legal victory for one man, but the ignition of something far greater, a new chapter in a story already layered with controversy, hope, fear, political complexities, and a growing international spotlight. Inside the court building, after the judge had announced the decision to grant temporary bail, Simon Nyoku Ekpa remained calm, though visibly emotional. He bowed his head slightly and looked at his lawyer, who gave him a reassuring nod. For weeks, Simon Nyoku Ekpa had been in custody, facing an uncertain future. During those long days, there had been public protests, private negotiations, behind-the-scenes diplomatic talks, and countless media reports. It had all led to this very moment, and although the full trial was still ahead, this decision marked a turning point that would influence everything to come. When court officials informed Simon Nyoku Ekpa that he would not be returning to his holding cell that evening, but instead would be placed under a bail arrangement until the next court date, he simply said, "Thank you," his voice quiet but firm. He turned to his legal team and thanked them personally. He also briefly embraced the woman who had testified as a character witness, expressing deep appreciation for her courage and truthfulness in speaking on his behalf. When word spread that Simon Nyoku Ekpa's bail had been granted, the reactions were immediate. A group of young men and women who had stood quietly all day suddenly broke into applause. A few people cried openly. One man held up his phone and shouted into a video call with a relative in Nigeria, "They granted him bail! They granted him bail!" The voice on the other end of the line broke into cheers. Meanwhile, in Nigeria, particularly in places like Enugu, Owerri, Abakaliki, Onitsha, and Aba, the news caused a sharp wave of responses. Supporters of Simon Nyoku Ekpa rejoiced. Some took to the streets in small celebratory marches, while others organized impromptu Thanksgiving prayers in churches and homes. To them, the bail approval was more than just a legal update. It was evidence that international justice could still serve the oppressed, that the voice of the southeast of Nigeria had been heard all the way in Europe. But not everyone was celebrating. In certain government quarters in Abuja, the capital of Nigeria, officials expressed dissatisfaction. One high-ranking official in the Nigerian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, who spoke under anonymity, said that the decision to grant bail to Simon Nyoku Ekpa sent a dangerous message and could embolden what he described as separatist propaganda. There were concerns that the Finnish court's move could affect ongoing security operations in southeastern Nigeria and potentially complicate diplomatic relations between Nigeria and Finland. Still, many Nigerian lawyers and human rights activists strongly disagreed with the government's perspective. A prominent Nigerian constitutional lawyer, Professor Oladapo Akinwale, appeared on national television and defended the decision. He said that Finnish courts had acted within their sovereign rights and respected the rule of law, adding that no democratic government should attempt to intimidate a foreign court for simply upholding human rights and legal processes. He explained that bail does not equal acquittal, and that courts everywhere have a duty to protect the rights of an accused individual unless and until proven guilty beyond reasonable doubt. He concluded by saying, "What we witnessed today is a victory not just for Simon Nyoku Ekpa, but for every Nigerian who believes in due process." In Finland, local newspapers carried the story on their front pages the following day. The Helsingin Sanomat, the largest newspaper in the country, published an editorial titled "Justice in the Balance," which discussed the complexity of hosting political dissidents or controversial figures within a democratic society. The editorial praised the Finnish court for walking the line carefully, neither bowing to political pressure nor ignoring human rights. Internationally, the news sparked commentary in several major outlets. The BBC, Al Jazeera, CNN and The Guardian all featured segments on Simon Nyoku Ekpa's bail ruling. For the first time in months, his name trended not only in Africa, but across Europe and North America. Particularly notable was the statement issued by a senior diplomat in the United States Department of State. While stopping short of celebrating the decision outright, the official said, "We are encouraged by the Finnish judiciary's commitment to upholding human rights and fair legal proceedings. We support the principles of free speech, due process, and judicial independence globally." When asked directly about the involvement of the cabinet members of the President of the United States of America, another official confirmed that private messages were indeed sent to the Finnish government. These messages urged the court to carefully evaluate Simon Nyoku Ekpa's human rights situation and to avoid holding him in pre-trial detention without solid legal grounding. While the Finnish judiciary operates independently of government influence, the diplomatic gesture was seen by many as a sign of mounting international concern about political repression in Nigeria and the broader issue of how governments treat political dissent in the digital age. Back in Pihajoki, Simon Nyoku Ekpa was escorted to a temporary release area where final paperwork was being completed. Authorities prepared a set of conditions for his bail, including restrictions on travel, limited access to digital broadcasting equipment, periodic reporting to police authorities, and possibly monitored communication. These conditions, though strict, were not unexpected. His legal team agreed to them without resistance, knowing it was the price of temporary freedom and the beginning of a longer journey through the courts. That evening, Simon Nyoku Ekpa walked out of the court building for the first time in weeks. As he stepped outside, he was greeted not by chaos, but by calm voices, warm embraces, and tearful smiles. He waved gently at the small crowd. When asked by a journalist how he felt, he paused for a moment, looked at the sky and said, "I feel grateful, not just for myself, but for every person who believed in truth and justice." He continued by saying, "I respect the court's decision, and I will obey every condition attached to this bail. This is not a moment for division. It is a moment for reflection and responsibility." He did not take questions beyond that. He and his legal team quietly entered a waiting vehicle and departed to an undisclosed location, likely under protection. The team said he would not resume any public broadcast until the court clarified the extent of restrictions placed on him, but that he remained committed to advocating for the people of southeastern Nigeria in ways that were lawful and peaceful. This is the end of our news update. Please click the icon on the top right corner of your screen to watch my next video. You will enjoy it. I will see you again in my next update. Enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye for now.